Hello, my name is Scroobius Pip, and I am one of the founders of the Pod Bible, and I'm joined today by John and Joel of the Dream Factory podcast, our silver medalists in the 2023 Pod Bible Awards Film and TV podcast category. How's it going, guys?
Good, thank you.
Very well. We're still riding that high, and the success that comes with it. I'm still struggling to leave my front door of a morning. I'm hoping that does die down.
I mean, we joke about it, but it's a big deal, right? Because you were up against
we
some
were over the
genuinely
moon.
big hitters, and it's what I love about the Pod Bible poll winners thing is you regularly have podcasts who their listeners just proper get behind it, and it gets to put you up there with ones that maybe have bigger listeners but aren't as engaged listeners and things like that. So it shows when you've got listeners who really behind you guys.
Oh yeah, we found it really exciting. I would say that the only things John and I ever message each other are basically a Zoom link once a week, but we were messaging each other loads about it and saying that we couldn't believe that we got silver. So no, we were absolutely delighted. And the campaign for gold next year is going to be absolutely outrageous. If we've
got a campaign to get nominated and then campaign to win.
We're going full tour bus, visiting all the constituencies.
I love it. Well, for the few people who aren't already listeners, John, can you tell people what the podcast is? I've asked you because Joel does the spiel at the beginning, which describes what the podcast is. So I want to see if you're listening each week. So, John, tell us what Dream Factory is.
A little insight into that is I initially wrote that sort of framework for the beginning of the show, which explains what it is back in the day. And ever since, Joel has just basically every other week on the podcast said, this doesn't make any sense. So we describe it as the world's greatest user-generated movie creation podcast, which it simply put means that listeners send us movie ideas and we flesh them out. That can just be a pun-based title, or they can give us a sentence or two. In very rare occurrences, some people send us effectively entire screenplays. But for the main part, people send us a pun-based movie idea, and we sort of flesh out to the point where, we flogged that dead horse, and then we move on to the next one. And officially, we pick a winner every week, but points mean nothing in this game.
Yeah. There's no real winners. I mean, there's no real losers. So we always kind of ask how the podcast started, but I was saying to Joel before you arrived, John, I've kind of got to ask that twice because it started and then it stopped and then it started again. So, yeah, how did it begin? And then how did it kick off again?
Well, Joel and I have been podcasting for like 10 years in total now. So we've done projects before Dream Factory, and then... So the initial thing way back in the days, we both graduated from university. We both did student radio at our university, and in the sort of limbo period straight after university, before either of us had got any real jobs or anything, we were just Facebook messengering each other, and expressed the interest in doing a podcast. Joel had an idea for a podcast where we watched the worst films ever made, and that was the podcast for ages. But we felt it was a little bit mean just watching bad films and pointing out that they're bad. So then we came up with a new idea.
Because obviously there are podcasts that watch terrible films. And I think we thought, well, the niche that we had is that the IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, has quite a famous top 250 films list that's always changing. And it's based on user ratings. And that's like a point of reference for people on the internet. And I sort of had the idea, if there's a top 250, there must be a bottom, like the bottom of this list must also exist, right?
Yeah.
And so we found you can quite easily sort of skip to the bottom 100 films on the Internet Movie Database. And so we thought, wouldn't it be funny to watch all 100 of those? But it did sort of transpire that a lot of them are essentially, like people's uni projects or things they just met, things that they'd like cobbled together a bit of money and they'd managed to make it straight after college or whatever. So I think we did feel a little bit spiteful, maybe.
The kind of films that probably aren't talked about a lot. So if they hear they're talked about on a podcast, they'll tune in.
Yeah.
And then it'll be you two being horrible about their...
Yeah.
They go, someone's actually talking about our film. Amazing.
I haven't ever thought about that before. Don't tell me that. It led us to some interesting places. We did a few live shows. I got to interview the director of Jurassic Shark, which was
Yes.
had always been on my list.
Mhm.
And I'm still Facebook friends with Crispin Glover's dad, Bruce Glover, who was
Amazing.
in Dracula 3000,
I love it.
which is I would actually recommend to
Yeah.
anyone. So yeah, that's how it started, and then we stopped doing that, and then after a while, we had the idea for Dream Factory, and we did it for a few years, and then we stopped again, and then it was really sort of lockdown boredom that got us back into it, and we've been pretty consistent for about 4 years now, like weekly for about 4 years now. So
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's as I've told you guys privately before, it's one of my immediate listens when it pops up on my feed. Partly because I love it, partly because it's short. It's always handy. The Netflix thing where you're scrolling through, and if something comes up, 25 minutes, okay, I'll give that a look.
Yeah.
So it's perfect for that. But you said, you talked about kind of coming up with a few different ideas. A lot of the biggest podcasts have spin-off shows and spin-off podcasts, and now you're the silver medalists. When are we hearing, for example, Pie Guys, Mr. Brown's Boys, Young Adult? You pitch a lot of new podcasts on the podcast. So what was Pie Guys?
Well, yeah. So I genuinely think all of our spin-off ideas are fundamentally much better than Dream Factory. Pie Guys was John and I would watch one of the films from the American Pie cinematic universe and eat a different pie with it, maybe a themed pie. That's good. That's just like a 10 episode series. That's a nice sort of spin-off, one-off kind of. You could binge those.
Mr. Brown's Boys. I can't even remember what that one was.
Happy to fill you in on that. That's we read all of Dan Brown's books chapter by chapter.
That's right.
Dan Brown, enormously famous and successful, but do you really know a Dan Brown? He's one of those. He's a titan of literature, and I think he deserves reappraising. Was basically our feeling. And the other one, sorry,
Young Adult.
What
we
was that,
finish.
John?
We watch. Basically, there was a fad of young adult movies for a while, but that resulted in a lot of sort of film franchises not actually being completed. So we would watch the films.
Yes, it was like Maze Runner and stuff like that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That were kind of really big budget and exciting and quite decent. I watched a few of them, but then just stopped because it didn't become the huge franchise it was meant to be.
It wasn't Twilight or Harry Potter, and so they sort of binned it after a film or two. Yeah.
There is a Dream Factory that exists that is Joel and I pitching podcast ideas.
Yeah.
That we
It's
could
just
also
it's
make.
too meta, isn't it? Who are we pitching them to and for?
I mean, you're talking to Pod Bible magazine,
True.
which has a podcast about podcasts. So
That's a good point.
We get as meta as it gets. So don't worry about that. If people were to, is there an episode you'd recommend? Is there kind of people should start at the beginning? Can they dip in at any point?
Oh wow!
Are there episodes? Weirdly, I've got a question of: are there episodes you'd recommend they avoid?
Ooh.
Purely because I know there was a run where you were reading a screenplay that a listener had listened to, so it's kind of hard to jump in midway through.
Avoid the middle of that run with one of our most dedicated listeners, Muscles Tom.
Explain that. So all you ask for is film ideas, and that, as John said, it'll often just be a pun-based name. But sometimes they give a bit of a rundown of what it is to guide you, to set you guys off. But sometimes, just sometimes, they write a full screenplay.
Yeah, I say most people would send us an elevator pitch, and he sent us a pitch that if you were an elevator, you'd maybe have to go up sort of 4,000 or 5,000 floors to hear the end of it. He, I don't know how much explaining there is to do. Pip, he's a guy who runs a mussels farm in Wales, and he spends his evening writing screenplays to send to us.
Of course. As is the norm.
He sends us really lengthy, fleshed out ideas that are thousands and thousands of words long. There was for a while it was sort of haunted horror themed films. He then moved into, as all great writers do, he kind of took the Hollywood dime and he started doing more sort of action blockbuster stuff. But we're hoping he'll return to the indie scene and start making those kind of more low budget.
I love it.
low budget horrors. Yeah.
We still have one of his screenplays on the back burner for like a week when we really need it, and I don't know anything about it apart from the fact that it is called The Shark That Wouldn't Go Away. But to answer your question about where to start, one of the only running jokes in the podcast is the fact that we don't have running jokes. It is not a podcast where you're going to sort of dip in and be like, this is so dense with in jokes and stuff. Every episode is like me and Joel get the Mission Impossible sort of memory forgetting stick after we record any podcast, so we don't remember anything that's happened before. So I'd just say start with the latest episode, and if you enjoy it, then go back a bit. And
I was going to say,
more, but
I think it's what makes it so bingeable is you can just put episode after episode on because it is just a run of ideas that go off on all sorts of different tangents. Well, to wrap things up, I said that you guys are one of my immediate listens if you pop up on my feed. What are your immediate listens? Can you give us a few? Obviously, you've both been in and around podcasts a long time. You don't have to mention any of my podcasts, or
just but yeah,
list. Take those as read.
Take those as
heard. yeah.
So what's your immediate go-to podcast?
What would you say, John? I think for me, it's a fairly recent podcast. I think maybe a year or so. Three Bean Salad, which is Mike Wozniak, Henry Packer, and Ben Partridge. I think it might be the funniest podcast of all time.
I've never listened to a single episode, but I know a load of people who listen, and I don't know why I've not listened. Every time it comes up, I'm like, that sounds exactly like my.
It is absolutely
kind of
brilliant. And there's an episode where Henry Packer spends 50 minutes at the start of the episode talking about trying to buy a birthday card for his niece, and it's the odyssey that he goes on to buy. It's absolutely brilliant. It's really funny, and it's also like not subtly, but it's sort of quietly, brilliantly produced. It has lots of original jingles, but they quite often do really interesting things with sound design that a podcast like that would never usually bother with. And there's a few kind of running jokes that for example, they mention crabs quite a lot as a comedic device. Like a crab as it's just a reference point, right? A crab's a funny thing. Every time a crab's mentioned, because they're mentioned quite often, there's just a bell that goes off in the background, like quite low in the mix, because that's just referencing the fact they always mention crabs. It's the crab bell, and like little touches like that I really appreciate, because it's it could be three guys being very funny, and it is, but I think they kind of elevate it a little bit with that.
This is the week I'm going to start it, because Wozniak used to have a game show type podcast as well, and I binged all of them and loved it. And it's one of the podcast moments that stuck with me more than anything, because every week he'd try a different introduction it was a live one to get the crowd drawn in. He was trying to come up with a catchphrase, and the one that killed me the most was he'd go, "Nice to see ya, nice to see you too." Try and get the crowd to give the correct reaction to "nice to see you," and they'd all obviously shout "to see you nice." No, nice to see. John, what's your go-to?
So I'm a big pop culture guy. So the Empire Film Podcast every week, as soon as that drops, I'm very excited. I also a lot of the pop culture stuff that The Ringer does in America, I think is brilliant. So the Ringerverse, which is their sort of nerd stuff, that's the Midnight Boys and House of House of R. No, oh my gosh, I've forgotten the name. Anyway, so that the Ringer stuff, and then in sort of more documentary stuff that I'm just so excited is when a new heavyweight series, rest in peace, hope it comes back soon, drops, and anything John Ronson does, I am there day one.
Oh yeah, unbelievable.
I was going to say in the postscript of the podcast, you do a quick roundup of what you've listened to and what you've enjoyed, and John Ronson's most recent one was the first one that got a shout out before you'd listened to it. It then got a follow-up shout out the week after, but it is just that good, isn't it? It's always so good. Yeah. Amazing stuff. Well, thank you very much, guys. You're on all podcast platforms. Are you on social media?
Yes, we are.
Dream Factory
Pod.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much, guys.
No, thank you for having us.
Pip.